Welcome to the Craft to Career podcast with Elizabeth Chappell, where every week we dive into how you can turn your craft into a successful career. Get ready to have the career you've always dreamed of.
Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Craft to Career podcast. I am Elizabeth Chappell, the host of the podcast, and this week I invited Doug Leko to come on the podcast. He is someone who has been quilting, I actually did not know this until we chatted, since he was so young. I mean, he's been immersed in the quilting world since before any of us can even imagine. There's a funny story that you're going to hear about Quilt Market, where he actually had a booth at a Quilt Market before legal age to be at Quilt Market. So Doug, I've been wanting to have on the podcast for a while because he has self-published a lot of books. He has also published with publishers and even has a book coming out soon with a publisher. And I really wanted to have him share with you listeners how to go about writing and publishing a book. Why would you want to do that? What's the cost, the benefit of a single pattern versus a book? All of the things about publishing a book. So I am really excited to introduce you to my friend Doug. Doug, so excited to have you here. Thanks for being a guest. I met you years ago at Quilt Market, and you worked for Moda. I'd love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about how you got into quilting. Let's start with that. How you got into quilting.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Elizabeth. So my name is Doug Leko from Antler Quilt Design, and I got into quilting when I was about 5 years old. And my mom has sewn and quilted her whole entire life, and she taught me how to quilt if I was going to hang out with her in her sewing room. And so it was just kind of one of those, it was just kind of a natural, it was just perfect for me to grow into it and learn all of the sewing aspect and the quilting side of it. And I started off with little placemats and rag quilts and small projects. It was always, my mom's big thing was always to have a successful project, not a big undertaking or a big overtaking where it was too much to handle.
Okay, so I'm curious. My mom was a quilter growing up and a sewer, and she wanted to teach me, and I was like, nope, no. So you loved it, though, from a young age?
I did, and so then in 2005, we started a quilt shop in our basement online, and we were kind of one of the, website quilt shops before it was a big thing, and e-commerce and all of that. And then in 2006, we opened a brick-and-mortar quilt shop, and we had that for just over 7 years. It's now been closed. But with that, it was one of those where I kind of became, just infatuated with the quilters and people coming in and all their projects and the fabrics. And you get to order all this fabric in advance, and just it's a lot of fun. It's eye candy and exciting, and all the people coming in, they're so nice. And then you have the food to begin with, and you have all the great people. There's so much of that.
That is cool. So when did you first go to, when was your first quilt market?
So my first quilt market, I snuck in. I was underage. I did not know there was an age. Quilt market, they didn't realize that I had my own booth and everything. So I had my first booth when I was 16, and they did not realize that. And they thought I was with my mom or grandma having a booth, and it was actually my own booth. So when I was 14, I started designing books and patterns. Our Moda rep at the time, and when we had our store, it was Holly Taylor, and Holly Taylor still designs for Moda, but she encouraged me. She said, it's a great industry, you'll love it. She had been in it, 15 years at that time as well, and she's like, you'll love the industry, it's great, you can have a lifelong career in it. And it was, and I had asked certain people, and other people that have been in the industry a while had told me too, well, you're going to need insurance, you're going to need, you need health care, and, you're going to need a retirement and all of that. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I had, Eileen and I had Moda telling me, you'll be great, you're going to do really well with it. And just take just start small and grow and just try different things and test the waters and, just learn from everything that you do. There's nothing wrong. There's so much room for growth in this industry. And I always say there's one of those, I love everything you do, from the pattern writing course to all your business suggestions and courses that you offer, because that wasn't there when I started. There were 3 books that were from a publisher that basically you could buy and you could read through them, that told you basically how to write a book and how to write a pattern and distribute in our industry. And they were somewhat outdated. They were not necessarily everything that you needed to learn. A lot of it also is trial by error. But really, it was one of those, you read the books, then you kind of got done, and you're like, oh, okay, now it's just a big jump, and where do I begin, and how do you kind of get to the next step? So even having your course would have been great, 15 years ago, because now looking at it, it's just shy of 15 years that I've been in the industry and having my own books and patterns.
Okay,
And
I'm shocked. So let's rewind because you just like slipped in there that you were 16 years old when you had your first booth and
yep.
you had been writing and publishing. When did you,
So I started my
how?
first so I wrote my first pattern when I was 14, and it was one of those where my mom's like, "Oh, you designed it. It was really pretty. It was just a friendship star quilt, a little variation of a friendship star, and had sash in between it. So nothing crazy, complicated, nothing crazy, that would be, just it wasn't. It was just a regular pattern. My mom's like, just try it. Very encouraging. It was really, I look back and it's like, oh, she really was just not being a mom, but she was like, you'll do fine, you'll do great. And then it was one of those where all of a sudden I kept designing and there was the next pattern and the next pattern and the next pattern. And I even find that still to this day after all these years where it's, when you have an idea, just kind of let them flow and just keep designing and don't just stop and be like, oh, should I tweak that now, or should I look at that, or should I alter this? Just keep playing, because at the end of the day, you're going to have many more creations that come to you, and just let them flow. And I also find, like, if I relax on a vacation, or if I come back, if I just need to, wind down a little bit and just kind of want to be creative, just to relax and the designs start flowing. And then, just go back later, then tweak and be like, okay, I'm going to change this block, or I'm going to change this size, or I'm going to change the sashing here, and then alter it from that standpoint. I think a lot of people get so set on having the perfect design right away. You don't have to have the perfect design right away, and what I started with back in the day and what I design now are completely different. You kind of alter and sway and change with the times, and our likes, just as much as anybody else's likes, change over time. So what we design now is going to be even different in 5-10 years from now too. So it's one of those where you will grow and evolve and kind of change as you begin. And even like my first pattern, I laugh at my first pattern. It was a little booklet pattern, a 5.5 by 8.5 little booklet pattern. And I look at it now and it's like, oh my gosh, the graphics and the picture and it was all done. And I think it was done in Publisher.
Okay.
Back in the day, and it was this learning Publisher, and always very big on the graphics, and I always was like, how does everybody get all the graphics? And it just kind of opens up a whole can of worms, because how do you get to that? How do you do your cover, and how do you get everything that you need to have a professional looking pattern? And
Yeah.
even at that time too, that was the big thing, is you take a picture of your quilt in a setting, and then you'd go to Walgreens or Walmart and have your photo developed, or go to Kodak and have it developed, and and then you'd like stick it with a piece of tape or glue or whatever on your pattern cover, and that was the big thing back in the day, was the real picture and tape it down, and
I like
that was
have
your
this
cover.
odd. I wish I could have been in the industry then just to see the change, because I hear so much about how it's changed, but like to hear that, I'm like, oh man, it has.
Yeah.
So what do you use now to write your patterns? What programming?
So now I use the Adobe. I have the Adobe suite, so I do the InDesign, Photoshop, and Illustrator, and I find myself going between all three of them. And yeah, they're great. I jumped to them a couple years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, and it was one of those when I started doing self-published books. It was one of those where I was like, okay, I need to find the next best thing, because Publisher just wasn't cutting it, and I had hired a technical writer, and that was just a lot of money going out the door, and it wasn't worth it. So I just actually in Minnesota here where I live, the Science Museum offers classes and computer classes and different things like that, and so they offer the whole Adobe Creative Suite classes, and I went and took all of them and learned all about how they worked and all their different quirks and tips and everything that they offer, and so that was really cool to get my feet wet.
I'm
basically
like,
in those. Yeah.
you are living my dream life. So I grew up in Minnesota. We've talked about this, you and I.
Yep.
And you're in Maple Grove, maybe.
Yep. Maple Grove. Yep. Northwest side of the cities. Yes.
Yep. So you go down to like St. Paul to the museum there. Oh,
Yep,
that's
down
where
in St.
I
Paul,
grew up.
right by the XL, the big ice rink and the ice arena.
I'm just walking down memory lane. So, okay, going back to self-publishing, can you talk to the listeners about the pros of self-publishing? Have you ever published with a publisher? Why would you go the self-publishing route?
Yep. So back in the day, this is kind of one of those things that's kind of like your first market, and just getting industry, and with the real photos on the cover, the paper covers. Back in the day, self-publishing also by itself is just kind of a big undertaking, and it's very daunting. And I know I talked to a lot of designers, and they're like, "Oh, I couldn't do that. It's just too much work, and I just didn't even know where to begin." And I just have so many questions. But at the end of the day, it's one of those, if you have your design style perfected the way you like it, and you're confident in it, and you love it, and your customers are used to it, just take that basic principle of your pattern writing and put it into a book. And it's maybe 100 pages, it might be 200 pages, it might be 30 pages. A lot of the times it's really just depending on that. And don't be freaked out about the page count, and don't be freaked out about the undertaking of a book. Just write a pattern and keep writing patterns and writing patterns and writing patterns. And then, there's so many things. You can turn it over to if you get it done and you're designing it yourself and you want to turn it over to a publisher, you most certainly can. Publishers, I always say they're great for the exposure. They're great for getting your name out there. If you're just trying something, you're unsure about self-publishing and you want to produce a book, go with a publisher. I've self-published about 22 books now.
Dang, I did not know it's that many.
Yes, and some of them are 30 pages, and some of them are 120 pages. It just they all are all over different. They're not all the same format. They're not all the same size, same concept. They're all different. But if you go with a publisher, that kind of can help you kind of get your feet wet as well. So you kind of can dive into that a little bit more as far as a publisher. They'll help you from everything from sewing your quilts to turning your manuscript to just sending it off, and they'll send you a finished book. To where if you write it yourself, you get control every aspect of it. So I have produced one book with Martingale, and we're the publisher on that one, and it's called Stashtastic. I have another book with them in the works called Stashtastic 2 that's coming out at the end of this year. But I choose to do self-publishing myself because you get to control a lot more of it. You get to also make more money, and at the end of the day, that's why we're in this industry, is to make money, and it's our livelihood. It's how we continue on and do other things. And to be very honest, you have a big upfront expense of self-publishing, but at the end you get to reap the rewards a little bit greater, and not a lot of people realize that. And another tip that I would suggest would be to partner up with a printer, and basically that's your publisher. You don't need a big name producer that's gonna publish your books and make sure it's all legal jargon and all of that. And you don't have to have that. You just connect with the printer. I use Palmer Printing here in Minnesota. They basically, I don't want to say cater to our industry, but they do really well in the creative and sewing industry, and they know a lot of connections, and they work with a lot of sewing machine manufacturers, and they work with a lot of designers and fabric companies, and they do a lot of different things for our industry. So they get us, they get who we're going for. They do a lot of people that have retired even in the industry, like Lynette Jensen Thimelberries. Back in the day, they produced all of her books, and she has hundreds of books. And so it's one of those where, as long as you partner with a printer or somebody that's going to help coach you with the paper weight and the quantities, and as soon as you kind of get a breakdown of your pricing and everything, you really can kind of get an idea of what the cost needs to be, how many pages you need to do, because there's signatures when you go to print. There's 16 signatures on a page basically, and so there's all different printing jargon that you're going to need to know, because it might be more cost effective to do a full signature than it would be to do like a 2-page extra, and only use like an eighth of the signature page. And so there's a whole other legal jargon too. I don't want to lose anybody. But,
yeah. Okay. What is signature? When you say that, I feel like I'm a foreign language.
So a signature is like when they print 9 times out of 10. Like if you go to a big commercial printer, they have a big press that's probably, I want to say it's maybe like 100 feet long. 80 feet long, and it basically takes this big piece of paper that is 16 pages of, 8.5 by 11, 16 pages, 2 up by 8 across, and so that's one side, and then they flip it over and print on the other side, but they basically would say it's a 16 signature page.
Okay.
And then, so that's how they do that's how they do that.
Have you seen this? Have you gone and seen?
Yep.
Because it sounds like you've seen this.
Yeah. So my mom. So it's kind of funny because my mom, before she had a quilt shop, she was in the printing industry for 20 years. So I have a lot more jargon of it and know a little bit more of it than probably the most. Just to kind of get your feet wet, but you can learn about it. It's great. There are video on social media. I can send you a video if you want to tag a video with this on kind of just how it works. There.
I think you should host a field trip where we come to Minnesota and we get to go and see that. Okay, let's plan this. I want to go see it.
It's awesome. I'm always amazed by the printer, and like the books. The books have a vegetable base oil that is used for the ink, And so, like, you walk in and it smells like vegetable oil in the printer. So it's really kind of weird, but it smells really good. The ink, some people don't like printer ink, but I guess I was, raised with it, and I do like the smell of it. But that's another
really
whole weird
cool.
quirk.
Well, I just, now I need to go. So, all right, we'll chat about a field trip there.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm interested and intrigued by the fact that you are actually working with a publisher right now. It sounds like the majority is your own, but you do kind of do a little bit. Why are you doing a book with a publisher right now?
So I'm doing a book with a publisher just to continue on with the series that I did with the first one in 2017. So I figured it's been enough time. I wanted to do another book in the series. They wanted to do another book. And we work really well. They're a great company. And again, it's one of those where it's nice to have the exposure. It's a different audience. They have different reaches than I have. And so you kind of just, you can work hand in hand. And I know several designers that do a published book with a publisher and then self-publish themselves. It just kind of works out. And, sometimes you like it and sometimes you don't. And you're like, okay, I don't want to do this again. And so it's one of those I often tell people, do your own first, do your own self-publishing and see if you like it. And then again, like you said, if you get done with the book and you're like, I'm not going to print on this, I'm not spending thousands of dollars printing this, give it to a publisher and they'll produce it for you if it's something that they feel they can sell and they can market with. And yeah, it depends I guess on how confident you are in yourself. And even with all your pattern courses, I think it's great because I've seen all your templates and everything. They the pattern writers and the designers themselves, it's a big undertaking, but once you keep going with it, you get more confidence built up.
Yep.
And you're kind of going to get to that, that point where you're going to be like, I can do this. Let's publish a book. And one of my biggest things was everything I did had to be a book. And at the end of the day, it was like, no, I'd rather put out quality versus quantity. And I'd rather have a, quality product and have a little bit higher price for pay a little higher price for the paper, have the nice photography done, nice graphics, all of that, again, you're doing it all yourself. You save money from that, but there is still a cost of doing it all and having a nice product.
So I'm curious with your books, do you buy them and carry them in your house or do you print on demand and someone else ships them for you?
So one of the things when you go to produce a book and you're going to want to talk to the printer, kind of when we talked about that already about, getting your quantities and getting, the pricing that you're looking for to kind of see how feasible this is. One of the things I would definitely suggest is to look at the quantities, and sometimes to make it profitable and to be successful, you might need to print 2,000, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, or 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000. You never know, but you always want to ask the printer for the price breakout of the quantities, and so that's where you're going to kind of know if you're going to need to print 5,000 copies, or like I remember my first book, I printed 1,000 copies, and it took me 2 years to get rid of. And then I went to the second one and I printed 10,000 copies and it was gone, in 3 to 4 years. So if you're okay with inventory hanging around a little bit to supply that, I would say have a little bit more investment, produce the larger quantities. A lot of times, wherever you go, as far as a publisher or a printer, they might have options for storage. But I have a pallet rack in my garage, an 8-foot pallet rack by 8 foot high, and it's got 3-4 pallets on it. And I will ship out to the distributors. I'll ship out to quilt shops, as wholesale, that type of thing. But it's one of those where you kind of find the happy medium. I know some designers that have a storage unit, and they put all in a climate-controlled storage unit. They put all their books and patterns in there from the printer. For the books, you're not necessarily going to want to print on demand. Some people will print on demand on a copier and color copier, and they'll put the binding on there, and they'll do like the plastic wire binding. But sometimes it really depends again on your product quality that you want and the look and the everything, where you're probably gonna need to mass produce your books.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to buy them in larger quantities, but even like patterns, some people will mass produce patterns at 100 at a time or 500 at a time or 1,000. But then you also have the ones that have a nice copy printer at home and they'll produce on demand.
Yep.
So kind of a little bit different from the pattern and book standpoint.
Okay. Is it fairly lucrative for you? Like if you have a pie chart of the different sources of income, where do your books fall in that? What slice of the pie?
The slice of the pie for like self-published books I would probably say 60 to 70%.
Oh wow, okay.
So, yeah, you can make anywhere from a couple dollars all the way up to $8, $9, $10 on a book, self-publishing it yourself. Versus if you go with a publisher, it's all negotiated rate with your publishers and what you get paid. And then it might be $1, it might be $2. You never know per book, and it's all on quantity sold. Where if you produce it yourself, you only have so many that you have to sell to make money, and then it's all profit. And it's
question though. So why, I know I have heard and talked with people, I can earn $12 a pattern, if I sell it, or, a little bit less with all the margins and everything. And then with a book, like why do a book over a single pattern?
So I've often, I used to do a lot of Christmas books. I did about 8 Christmas books. I started with Christmas books and did all these kind of like seasonal books, if you want to say. And it was one of those where it was easier to produce a book than it was to produce 20 other patterns. So most of my books have about between 15 to 22 projects in them. I always like to make sure you get a good quantity of projects. And I always try to make sure that it's one of those where if you price it out, it's like, okay, $1 to $2 a pattern. But if you have a single pattern, so many people produce patterns, and there's patterns all over. There's free patterns online. It was easier to produce a book and have more of a quality of the projects, of basically the whole package than just one single pattern. And I found that the single patterns also ebb and flow in the industry. Back in the day, before technology and before the online e-commerce and before social media, you would go to market and you would sell thousands of dollars, 30, 40, 50 thousands of dollars at market, because that was the only time shop owners came. They got to see, it was packed full of people. The booths were packed. And everybody that came to market was looking for those new ideas and those new things. And that's still a lot today. But now we get to introduce things on social media when we want to. We have distributors that have also a reach with the customers as well on social media. So there is the newness factor of patterns is not there where it's as lucrative as it used to be of patterns. So that that's another one of those evolution things kind of change with the industry. So I always find that I can sell more books than I can sell patterns. Now, I'm not saying pattern sales are down. I wouldn't say that. It's all on your designs and how you publish as well, and how you produce your patterns and books. So some people patterns are dead, and some people think they're great. I think they're great. It really each their own.
Yeah,
if that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and I mean, going way back to when you first were talking about, I love what you mentioned, that just start writing patterns. Everyone wants the big pattern that's going to catapult them into stardom, but you don't start with that. You've got to create, and you don't know your look at first. It's going to evolve, and you've seen that yourself. Yep. If I had to describe your look, I would say that it's very traditional. I mean, antler quilt. It's like cabin-y kind of. I don't know what words would you use?
So my old logo that used to be, so when I first started, I didn't want like Daisy Rose to be my name of the company, and a guy shows up. That wasn't my thing. So I wanted more masculine. I wanted the top of the alphabet. I have a marketing degree, and so it was one of those where I wanted the top of the alphabet. So that's where antler came in, and I wanted to make sure everybody kind of knew it was a guy. It wasn't whatever. But I used to have an antler rack that was my logo, and everybody assumed it was taxidermy. So everywhere I went, it was always taxidermy. So I got rid of that and changed that. And again, it's one of those, you don't know when you start what their perception is going to be and what people are going to perceive when they look at a logo. So logo design is another big aspect of your patterns and everything as well. But it's one of those where when you first start, and it's just your look is completely different. Yeah,
okay, I'm thinking I should have gone with candy quilts instead of quilters candy, so I'm up with the alphabet.
But yeah, and having the masculine part of it, I would definitely say I'm very traditional. Design is very traditional. I love scrappy, that, but more of my designs tend to be very traditional versus modern. But I can play with the modern fabrics and use the modern fabrics and incorporate that. There's no problem with that. It's just more usually tend to be traditional designs.
Yeah, well, and you have a good look. I mean, you can look at something and know, oh yeah, that's Doug's, And also the book, so that's interesting to think about. So I like thinking about, like you said, let's just say Valentine's because it's coming up soon. If you have a lot of heart patterns, it's going to be easier to just put that in a book where everyone can get it all. And there's an appeal to, I can get all of those in one place rather than having to buy all the individual patterns. Yes. Yeah. So I like that idea for a book of putting... And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, you're in this more than I am, but if a book has a great theme, it's way more attractive and it's going to sell better.
Absolutely. Yeah, when customers fan through a book, and even like if you go to Barnes & Noble or you go to any kind of bookstore and you're looking at it, or even if it's just Target, and you're looking at a book, you're always going to flip through it and fan through it and be like, okay, are there projects? And when we had the shop, we always would say we have to have at least 3 projects that we personally would make out of a book. whether it be, very embroidery or applique or traditional piece or modern. It's one of those where you should be able to fan through a book, and that's always a good rule of thumb to make sure you at least have projects that you would make in a different customer's eye, because everybody's going to see something different. So it's like you said, take all those heart patterns, put them into one, change the photography, change the patterns a little bit, maybe remake the sample in something different where it's not Valentine's, just to kind of show, oh hey, it doesn't have to be Valentine's, it could be red black and black and gray, you never know. So kind of change that part of it, but you always want to fan through it and make sure that the quality is good from that standpoint of the projects and the pattern writing, because a lot of customers will look at that too. They'll look at the writing and when they fan through it to make sure that they can understand it. Because I'm sure you've heard that too from even people in your course and yourself, of people going, well, I don't understand this jargon, or I don't understand what they're saying here, or there's too much verbiage, or it's just too much illustrations, there's no pictures at all, or there's nothing to help me get to the end quilt at the end of the day. And that's basically why they buy your product. And if they will learn that over time too, if they buy an antler quilting pattern, they know it's going to get them from the beginning, labeling their pieces, to sewing the projects, to trimming, to pressing, and at the end of the day they're going to have a nice product at the end. They will learn that pretty fast, and they are very quick. And even kind of having this side of it now with the sales rep side of it, when you're sitting with a shop owner, they will know, like, oh, customers come in and, oh, they don't want to buy this pattern, or, oh, they don't want to buy this because they won't make this because it's all type, or it's not, there's no pictures at all, or this one's only diagrams and there's no words. They don't even know what to do or to begin.
Yep.
So there's all different aspects of it, but you get a lot of the general consensus from the shop owners and the customers as well, and that also helps drive what you do as your designer, and when you produce books and patterns in general.
Well, and I mean, for quilting for me is relatively new. So I still remember certain patterns that I bought where I was like, oh yeah, I got this. And other ones where I was crying, like, I don't know what to do. I think I'm going to cut my fabric wrong. So do you remember, I guess more as a shop owner, you saw that where people were like, yeah, this person I trust, these patterns I cannot.
Oh yeah, I remember that as a shop owner, customers coming in and absolutely frustrated, and honestly, even like there would be some of my first patterns. I have rewritten a lot of my first patterns to have the today's, basically quality, I would say, but all of like the illustrations and everything that people are accustomed to now with my books and patterns, I rewrote several of the first ones, and they've had a second life basically, and they've gone on to sell way more than they did their first go around, and everything from the get go, from when you produce a pattern to it's okay. Was this people have questions on this, or did you hear a lot of complaints, or what was that? And you kind of can alter that and change that, but you do hear about it from the customers, and to me that's the best part, and that's part of reflecting, and I think that's a very honest way to get feedback from your customers, is to look back and reflect on your patterns. Everybody can produce a pattern, and everybody can be excited about it, and you can produce a pattern and you can put it out there and you wonder why people aren't buying it or whatever that. But it's okay to ask for feedback and be like, what did you like about my pattern? Is there something you didn't like? Was there, is there something that it's missing? And customers will be very honest. That's one thing, most quilters will be very honest and tell you everything that you don't want to hear, but you do need to know.
It's
and
true.
I think it's great. I really do. You got to take it with a grain of salt, because you're going to get people that are going to be like, well, you didn't tell me where to place this exact fabric, and I want to place it exactly where you placed it. But at the end of the day, he or she is probably one of a million that is going to make that pattern, basically, I'm just going to say, and not everybody else is going to want to place that fabric exactly that. So you're going to get different feedback than you want, but that's all part of getting honest feedback, I think, which is great.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned something that you have redone some of your past patterns to reflect what people want today. Can you touch on how the evolution of the pattern, what they're like now compared to what people used to want and expect?
So back in the day, nothing had to be color. It was like your cover quilt was color, and your instructions were all, unless you were with a publisher for a book, your patterns were basically black and white, and it was cheaper to do a black and white copy and a black and white paper nowadays, and it's completely reversed, where it's cheaper to do a full color pattern in a full color book. I remember in my first book, and it was in black and white with a color insert in the middle, and it was cover color. And I remember going to my second book, and they came back and they're like, do you know it's cheaper to do a full color book? Every page is color. And I was like, no way. And just kind of like the light bulb went off. And it was great, because it's just kind of everything kind of changes and advances. And now you see, it's basically you're in the minority if you have a black and white pattern. Everything is now full color, and it's great. And so that's one of the best things I would say has improved from the patterns from 15 years ago to now, is everything's full color, and it helps clarify things so much more, because you're not looking at everything in grayscale. Now, I still design a lot in grayscale, and I still do that, but that's a whole other story. But, grayscale is just kind of one of those good mediums that if anything can be in grayscale, you can do anything.
So I remember one of my very first patterns actually was on 8.5 by 11, black and white, printed off of just a printer,
Yeah.
folded in half. And it was actually a bit confusing because I had, I wanted the diagram
Yeah.
and I wanted,
Yeah.
that is
There's
interesting.
I remember going to some quilt shops and they produced patterns in our industry back in the day, and they've now retired. But I don't want to say that name. But you go to their quilt shop and they'd have a copy machine in the corner, and they literally hit print and they'd copy the patterns, and it like copied like 55 times, and the quality wasn't great and it didn't look really nice. But at the end of the day, they sold a lot of patterns, and back in the day, that's what you were accustomed to. That's what you were used to. Where now it's like we want to have the full color, we want to have it trimmed really nice, we want to have it printed very nice, stapled, or bound a different way, or wire bound. It really just kind of our perception of what we need to produce now is a lot greater, which is nice.
Yeah.
And what customers expect.
And it's interesting too. So obviously I've got two people that I work with, my customers and my students. And the customers are generally, they want a pattern that tells you exactly how to replicate what's on the cover. The designers, people who design quilt patterns, we're outside of the box. You don't need to tell me. I can see it. I can do it.
Yeah.
So it's a learning curve, but I've noticed that the customers like to have a diagram each step of the way. Here's what you do. Here's where you put it. Label it, even though it seems obvious that, well, if that picture's under this step, that's what you do. It's like they need their hand held and they need everything told to them. Have you noticed that?
Oh yeah, and that was one of my biggest things, because when I started doing patterns at 14, I remember customers coming in and they were confused over this or they were confused over that pattern, and it was like I always one of those. If I ever started a pattern company, I would want XYZ, and I knew when I started I had to have XYZ because that's what customers came in and complained about, or they were looking for the diagrams and the words. And so I always made sure all my patterns right from the get-go had the diagrams in the labels and things like that. And some of those have never changed over time, and there are some things that I have still 15 years later that I had on my first pattern that is still there because it makes sense. But yeah, they're very much so. Customers will definitely tell you, this is great, not great. I need this part of it, and I want this explained this way. Or can you tell me the pressing? A lot of people shy away from pressing, or even like the size of that unit. You're gonna sew the star together, let's just say, and tell them the size of the pattern. They want to know. They need to know. Everybody's 1/4 inch and cutting is completely different, and those are the fundamentals and the foundation of quilt making. But every quilter is different, from the 1/4 inch to the rotary cutting, and they want to know, okay, at the end of the day, what size does the star have to be? Does it have to be, 8 inches? And Elizabeth's patterns tell me it has to be 8 inches. Okay, I'm going to get it to 8 inches. So you help them out from that standpoint, because they might take a roundabout way to get there and not follow your patterns, because you honestly do have that. Like if you or I were to pull up a pattern, you and I are going to make it probably completely different than the pattern was written.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those where everybody's going to take their own course to get to the end, but give them all these things, because I always say the customers, you need it. You need to not treat them like they're 5, but you need to explain it to them like they're 5. Where it's you always would when you kind of think back to like elementary school or kindergarten, and basically you think all those books and the education and illustrations. That's what you need to write the patterns for, because it's going to help explain it, and then there is no question at the end of the day of what did she mean by this, and did she really want me to use this square, or was I supposed to use this square? And don't just tell me use a 3.5 by 5 inch piece of fabric and pair it up with this. Well, what fabric? Background? An accent, a border fabric? What what do you use? So I think explaining it the best, explain dummy down, I guess, is the best way, or KISS method, keeping it simple. That is also a great mantra to have when you're writing patterns, because you can't, and don't assume anything. That was the other big thing. Don't assume anything with pattern writing. And a lot of you and I are talking about self-publishing as well, but a lot of what you do in your pattern course and what you do when you write a pattern transfers over to publishing a book, or transferring over to anything when you explain and teach a product and teach your pattern. It's all on the same principle of you start at ground zero and you work up.
Yep, exactly. And what are the steps you take? And I've never, ever heard anyone complain that a pattern was too detailed. I mean, if there's someone who's very advanced and they're reading a basic pattern, they know what they can skip over, and I don't need that. But no one's ever complained like this pattern just had too much, too much help. No one's ever complained about that.
Yeah. They love to be in your head. They love to know what you're thinking about it. So, if you write a little, like I'll put a little thing in there, also like Doug's tip, and it's a little bubble that I create next to the pattern, and be like, okay, you're only going to use half these pieces. You don't need half these pieces for this step. Save them for the next step. or you're only going to need to select 14 out of the 16 that you cut. You're going to have 2 extra, or select your favorites, or fussy cut. This would be a great option to fussy cut in this step. So I'll often put that in there because they do want to know what you're thinking and what's your thought process when you designed it as well. So yeah, helping them, all of that part really makes a big difference.
Yeah, I like that. A little Doug tip. So can you share with our listeners, are you still a Moda rep? Can you tell us all the aspects?
Yep.
What do you do besides books and patterns?
So I am a Moda rep. I've been a Moda rep for 5 years now. And so I have southern Minnesota, northern part of Iowa, western Wisconsin, and then part of the UP of Michigan as my territory. So I have about 120 stores that I call on every 6 to 8 weeks. I call on, and I'm in appointments 2 to 3 times a day. It just kind of depends on weather, or it depends on whatever else is going on, and if there's shop hops going on. But yeah, that's my day job, I always say. And so before I became the sales rep in the territory, I traveled and spoke all over the world for about 10 years, teaching and speaking the quilting and my designs and different things like that. So I've been, been over to Germany and Poland and taught, over there, and mostly around the United States, and kind of taught all over. There's only a couple states I haven't taught class in, so it's really been kind of fun. But after lugging around like 4 suitcases through the airport every couple weeks, I was really quite tired of that, and flying so much and doing all that. And so now I get to drive 40,000 miles a year in the car, and I get to meet with the same shop owners every time and get a nice, get to make a nice relationship. And, you kind of get that part of it. And then I get to go home, whether to the hotel or go home in the evening or on the weekends, and design books and patterns. And it's just, like I said at the beginning, it's just kind of a nice relaxing thing. And sometimes you're in a store and you're seeing the pretty fabric, or you get an idea when you're driving. And everybody kind of gets their ideas different ways. But then you get to go back home or to the hotel and get to make those ideas into a pattern or a design, or again just sketch it down, because I'll even grab a piece of paper or scratch paper or graph paper and just jot a design down if I can't go on the computer and put it into Illustrator.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Something pretty quick.
So I love having in the past when I had my subscription box and I had a Moda rep. First of all, I have to say it makes a difference. At first I was like, really? I've got to have a Moda rep, but to come out, it actually does. Moda knows what they're doing. Like it does. Yep. It works. But on the quilt market aspect, there is something to the human connection. Like when you know someone. Yep. So please tell me that quilt market's not going to die. I know it looks so different, but it's around, not gonna, right?
Oh yeah, it's around. It's not going anywhere. With having the reps through COVID, we worked. I think I was only off a couple weeks in March and a couple weeks in April, and by May 1st, I was back on the road at the beginning of COVID. And one thing, any time, this is kind of like a interesting segue we could take, but anytime there's a world pandemic, whether it be 2001, 2008, 2012, or 2020, with COVID, the world pandemic creates our industry. It's a frenzy for our industry. We have. Our industry is very much, kind of extra money. It's not, it's kind of a hobby thing. You don't have to have it. It doesn't expire. It's one of those, I was just telling a shop owner this morning, it's like the fabric, if it's late, it's not going to expire. It's not like the milk and eggs at the grocery store where it's going to go bad. If a fabric's late a couple weeks, it's okay. The other great thing is nobody else in the world has the fabric yet, But it's one of those, our industry is thriving, and it still is. And to go back to market, we've all missed market. The shop owners have extremely missed market, more than I think anybody else. But the reps have been around talking to everybody, and I would say Moda has about 28 reps, and we cover we cover all the stores. We visit the quilt shops the most frequently. I would have to say that's great on Moda's part, Mr. Dunn's part. The owner of Moda, that he really wants us to be in our stores, and it's all sizes stores, so it's not just large stores, small stores, it's all the whole gamut. But it's one of those where we're helping, holding your hand, and you remember that with your Moda rep, and it's one of those where they help you with ordered product, and I think they don't get utilized as much. Some of us reps don't get utilized as much as we should, because some shop owners want to do it on themselves, and even e-commerce. Some e-commerce businesses be like, "Oh, I'll order fabric online. I can do it." Well, it's completely different. We have different avenues. We can help you with different things. We can order product differently, and so it's one of those where everybody should utilize a rep. But then when you go to market, it's one of those where the reps are there. They're great. You can say hi. But we're going to come see you at the end of the day. And so go to market and take the business classes and take the seminars and take all that and have the human contact and the connection and do all the meet and greets. And you see in so many Facebook groups, you see so many people on Facebook, they're like, well, are you going to go to market? Are you going to go to QuiltCon? Because QuiltCon's coming up. And, so they're like, are you going to meet up, or let's connect, or I want to meet somebody in person, or, this would be great. And it's one of those where you might get to see these people on social media, but then you get to actually meet up with them in person. And that human contact is amazing. And even shop owners, they're going to be like, I got to go meet Elizabeth Elizabeth, I know I got to go to market, and I remember that, going to market and being like, okay, I want to meet this person, and I got to go meet this person, and I want to make sure I can say hi, or doing that part of it. So I don't think market is dead, because you still need that, that tactile touch. Our industry is so tactile, but at the end of the day, it's still that communication and that networking and that person-to-person contact.
Yeah,
it's not going to go away.
Okay, good. Because well, Erin Moore, I think she was my Moda rep. She's still friends. Like, she just texted me the other day. She's not even doing that anymore, and I don't use the rep anymore because I'm not selling stuff. But and way back in the day, I went to the Moda party that they have. I don't know if they will. I mean, that is the thing. You got to go.
Yep.
But the people at that table, still friends with them. Like,
exactly.
Still.
Yeah.
And so that's when people are like, I don't know if market's staying around. I'm like, please stay around.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we've got to have that. So, yeah.
And market might change. You never know. I know spring market was canceled, but their fall market, they're going full-fledged for fall market. And it's one of those where I tell everybody, if you can just go for the day, hop on a flight and just go for the day. Market is great from so many different aspects, but even other designers will make a comment, be like, well, why should I have a booth? I shouldn't go to market. I have social media. At the end of the day, that exposure at market is completely different than your social media, because you also have customers. The average age of our industry is 65, 66 years old, and they might not want to look on social media. They want to see the quilt in real life, and they want to see Elizabeth's designs, and they want to go, oh, I got to get more of those quilters candy patterns. She was so nice to me at market. And you'll get those people that will come back every time, be like, you're so nice. I met you at the Moda party, or I saw you in the hallway. You're at the hotel. You'll even get that. I rode the elevator with you. I even had. I remember one of my first markets in Houston. I rode in like the middle seat in a taxi, and I still know the ladies that I was, that I sat in the middle of this on the floor when I should not have sat there. But it's just one of those. It's just the connection thing, and it's market is great from so many aspects. Than people realize. And some people think, oh, it's just a trade show. It's a high pressure, high sales, and it's really no sale. No sales.
Right.
It's not like they're gonna push everything down your throat. It's not high sales and all that.
No, it's the people. It's the connections.
It's the people connection.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's one thing, even after the COVID, or as COVID's evolving and changing, that's one thing the shop owners I find when I go into stores, they're like, what's new, what's exciting, from the pattern standpoint, because they're looking for that next block in the month, or they're looking for that next great pattern, or they're looking for that next idea that's just kind of sitting in a booth that people are like, oh, that's really cool, but should I try it? And they'll try the patterns at market, because they can get, a couple, 5 or 6 patterns, you can send them patterns. They see that, it's different than seeing it on a computer. And so that's one thing with market. I'm like, pro market, have a booth, have market, have some representation. And if you, for some reason, cannot be at market or can't go to market, show up for, have a booth, but at least have some presence there with a fabric company, partner with somebody else, partner with the distributor to have your products there. There's nothing wrong with that. And, the exposure rate, even from the distributor side of it, is great, too, from being at market. They get to see all your products, and they're going to want to look at your patterns. And shop owners are going to look at your patterns. I remember my first book, it was a block of the month book, and I was at Salt Lake City, and the shop owners were, like, looking through it, trying to find errors and trying to find if there's anything wrong with it. Because here's this 16-year-old boy at market with a booth, produced this quilt book, and who is he? What is this doing? And all of this whole thing, and they're looking for it to try to find anything wrong with it. And I look back and it's like, oh my gosh, that book was fine. It was great, but I've evolved so much. But they want to look through it, they want to fan through it, they want to make sure it's going to fit their customers' needs, and it's going to explain everything, kind of like we've talked about. They want to know it's going to check all the boxes.
And when I had the box back in the day, I can assume this is like a quilt shop. I was looking for those kind of hidden gems that weren't really publicized. That I wanted to find that. Like, I want something unique. And there were some booths I still remember. I was like, oh, that's amazing. I've got to get that, So there is something to that.
And even like market, like, I always joke about it. We wonder with COVID, and this was something like we were talking with the shop owners, and it's one of those, like, you think, okay, with COVID, are they going to let everybody go up one, down, up one aisle, down the other aisle, up one that? But my thing was always, I would start, like, in the middle of the aisle someday at market, or I'd start at the end, and I would literally go back and forth different directions. And sometimes I'd even go, like, the opposite way of everybody else, or go up the other ways, going, east to west versus north and south. And you're going to catch different things as you go, especially from that shop owner standpoint. And even when you, like, evaluate your booth and you create a booth. And honestly, some people, too, when I say you have a market booth, they're like, well, I can't afford a big island, or, 4 booths, or I can't afford to have a big booth or whatever. They have small booths. They have different size booths that you can have, and any exposure is better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It really
It
is
is.
for market.
I will say it is exhausting though, because you're on, and you're meeting people. And we quilters, we're an introverted bunch, so
Yeah.
it is awesome. But afterwards, I'm like, I need to hibernate for a couple weeks and like regroup, because it's a stimulus overload,
Oh yeah, and
But
for me, market's a lot of ideas flow at market, because it's just one of those. It's you're with all the creative people, and it's like, oh, what if I change this, or what if I went home and designed this? I know many times I've come home from market, and I literally had designed 2 or 3 books from coming home from market, and just sitting down and just design books. And this is over, of course, a couple of years, but you design some books after market, because or you design patterns, or you come home on the airplane and you're jotting down ideas, and you're writing down different things, because you get so inspired, and you meet all these great people, you see all these beautiful fabrics, and you're like, oh, what was that fabric? I could put that in here, and this fabric would look great there, and there's so many great things about market. I love market.
So are you going to QuiltCon?
I am hoping to go to QuiltCon. Depends on the
Okay.
weather, depends on the schedule. I'm hoping to go to QuiltCon.
I'll be there, so I'll look for you. I hope you
Very
get to
good.
make it. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you for
Yes.
coming on here and sharing all these insights about self-publishing, working in the industry. If our followers want to find you, where should they find you?
They can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Doug Leko, and it's Leko, very short, very easy. Otherwise, it's Antler Quilt Design on Facebook as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being
Thank
here.
you.
This was awesome.
Perfect. Thank you.
Doug, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure to chat with you. If you are enjoying the podcast and you want to hear more on how to grow your creative business, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and go ahead and leave a review. I love hearing what is helping with the podcast, what you're learning, and if there's anything that you want to hear more about. Thanks so much for being here. We will see you next Friday on the Craft to Career podcast.